Rain swallowed the valley in a single, trembling breath, turning the pasture into a blurred memory of what once felt safe. A lone horse stood at the open gate, soaked to the bone, head bowed as if listening for footsteps that never came. Lightning stitched the sky, revealing the empty road, the way a broken promise exposes a wound. Somewhere in the darkness, a man who should have returned stayed hidden from the truth he feared most. And the horse, loyal beyond reason, kept waiting through the rising storm, anchored not by rope or fence but by hope. He didn't know it yet, but the night was preparing to unravel everything he thought he had buried. What awaited him beyond that gate would break his silence and pull his heart back toward truth. Rain pressed against the fields like a weight the land could no longer carry. The sky churned in dark layers, folding over the valley with a slow, suffocating breath. At the pasture gate, the horse stood unmoving, as if carved from the storm itself. Water streamed down his mane, dripping in thin lines that vanished into the mud beneath his hooves. Yet he did not shift, not even when thunder cracked overhead. Something held him there, something no wind or rain could chase away. He kept his gaze fixed on the road, a narrow, winding strip that disappeared into the thick curtain of storm. Hours earlier, a hand had brushed his neck, gentle but trembling, a promise whispered without words. The man had walked away quickly, shoulders hunched, head low, as though he feared the horse might see the grief he tried so hard to hide. He had said he would return, and the horse, trusting without hesitation, had believed him. As night deepened, the storm grew sharper, slicing through the valley with cold, relentless sheets of rain. The barns in the distance flickered with dim light, their windows trembling in the wind, but the horse did not move toward shelter. He remained at the gate, muscles taut under the punishing rain, breath rising in soft plumes that dissolved into the darkness. Every sound around him, broken branches, shifting trees, rolling thunder, seemed secondary to the quiet he listened for. A single lantern glowed from a neighbor's porch, wavering with each gust. They saw him there, a lone silhouette swallowed by the storm, but no one crossed the field. Something about his stillness felt sacred, like interrupting him would break a fragile thread holding the night together. Time bled forward in slow, trembling seconds, yet the horse remained, anchored by memory and devotion. The storm pressed harder, as though testing the limits of his patience, but he stood firm. He had chosen his place, chosen his vigil, chosen to wait for the man whose footsteps still lived somewhere in his heart. Through the sweeping darkness, he listened for the faintest echo of return, unaware that his silent faith was already reshaping the fate of the coming dawn for them both. Daniel Hart had once carried softness in his hands, the kind that made horses lean toward him instead of away. Long before the world carved hollows into his voice, he had been the kind of father who paused to watch sunlight fall across his daughter's hair. Lily would run through the yard barefoot, her laughter rippling through the ranch like a warm wind. And wherever she ran, Ember followed, a bright young gelding with curious eyes and a heart tuned to hers. They had grown together, those two, Lily brushing his coat with small, careful strokes while humming songs she never quite finished. Ember stood perfectly still for her, lowering his head so she could reach the places she insisted needed extra love. Sometimes Daniel watched from the porch, coffee cooling in his hands, as Lily skipped around the horse with ribbons, stories, and the kind of joy only children carry without fear it might one day disappear. The ranch felt lighter in those days. The fields breathed with color, the fences seemed sturdier, and even the old barn creaked with a gentler rhythm. Lily would beg Daniel to join her rides, and he often did, letting her lead while Ember trotted patiently behind her commands. She had a way of talking to the horse as if he understood every word, and maybe he did. There was an innocence between them, a quiet bond that made Daniel believe some hearts were born already knowing each other. But innocence is fragile, and life does not protect what it does not fear. The day Lily fell ill arrived like a shadow that refused to lift, no matter how many lamps Daniel lit or how tightly he held her hand. Ember waited at her window for days, pacing the fence line as though trying to summon her back with every restless breath. And when she slipped away, the world seemed to fold inward, taking Daniel's voice, his light, and the part of him that still believed mornings could begin with hope. After her passing, the ranch shifted. Sunlight reached the ground but never warmed it. The laughter that once carried across the fields dissolved into long, unbroken stretches of silence. Daniel stopped riding, stopped tending to the small rituals Lily used to fill with delight. Ember lingered near the porch, staring at the door Lily once raced through, but Daniel couldn't bring himself to step outside. Grief had thickened around him like fog, heavy and shapeless, leaving no path forward. He started working in fragments, moving through days without intention. The barn grew dust in corners Lily once swept clean. Ember's grooming brushes sat untouched, their bristles stiffening with time. Daniel couldn't bear the sight of them. Each object shimmered with memories he could not hold without breaking open. Grief can make a home inside a person, and in Daniel it settled deep, muting everything he had been. His voice thinned, his patience frayed, and every time Ember approached, searching his face for the warmth he once knew, Daniel turned away. Yet Ember remained, loyal without reason, waiting without complaint. Some days he stood by the fence for hours, watching the house as if willing Daniel to step outside. Other days he pressed his muzzle gently against the barn door, listening for the soft of Lily that no longer filled the air. The horse carried his own kind of sorrow, quiet, steady, and shaped entirely by devotion. But he did not give up. Not then, not ever. Seasons shifted around them, but the distance between man and horse stayed untouched. Daniel retreated into himself, building walls and grief convinced him were necessary. Ember lingered in the open spaces, refusing to let the memory of Lily fade from the land she loved. And so the ranch existed in two worlds, one wrapped in silence, the other waiting with patient hope for a promise Daniel no longer believed he could keep. But the world has a way of testing what we try hardest to bury. Daniel moved through the days as if they were rooms in a house he no longer recognized. Grief had turned his life into a maze, and each corner carried the echo of Lily's voice, soft, bright, painfully close. He avoided the places where her memory felt too sharp. The barn was the worst of them. Every inch of it breathed her presence, the brushes she lined up in perfect order, the colorful halters she insisted Ember preferred, the notes she scribbled on the wall to mark his growing height. Stepping inside felt like stepping into a wound, still bleeding, so Daniel kept his distance. He fed Ember later each morning, sometimes forgetting until the sun hung high above the hills. He no longer spoke to the horse the way he used to, offering quiet reassurances or gentle pats on the neck. Instead, he worked quickly and wordlessly, leaving before Ember's soft eyes could search his face too deeply. The horse didn't understand the silence, but didn't challenge it either. He simply watched Daniel walk away, head tilted slightly, as though waiting for the moment the man would turn back and remember the world they once shared. Days blurred together like watercolors running in the rain. Daniel threw himself into chores that didn't need doing, stacking fences twice, repairing tools that weren't broken, sweeping corners of the porch that were already clean. Anything to keep from hearing the small voice in his memory saying, "Daddy, come ride with us." Anything to avoid the sight of Ember lifting his head whenever he passed, hopeful in a way Daniel could not bear. He began skipping grooming entirely. Dust settled on Ember's coat, gathering in soft patches near the saddle line Lily used to keep spotless, his mane tangled in places, clinging to the wind with a kind of weary patience. Yet the horse never protested. He followed Daniel with quiet steps when called. And when Daniel didn't call, he waited at the fence, ears pricked, searching for a voice that no longer reached him. Sometimes Daniel caught Ember watching him from across the field, standing perfectly still, as though guarding a memory too fragile to touch. Those moments cut the deepest. It felt as if the horse knew the shape of Daniel's sorrow, as if he recognized the heavy pull of guilt that lived beneath his ribs. And Daniel, unable to face what those eyes reflected, turned away each time. The breaking point came on a day when Daniel's heart felt heavier than usual. The morning had been thick with reminders he tried desperately to ignore. An old photograph of Lily slipped from a shelf while he dusted, landing face up on the floor. Her smile, bright, untamed, alive, hit him with a force that stole his breath. He placed the photo back without looking at it again, but the image clung to him like a burr. He tried to push through the day, but everything seemed misplaced. The tools he couldn't find, the paperwork he couldn't finish, the thoughts he couldn't quiet. By late afternoon, clouds began gathering over the valley, darkening the horizon with the promise of rain. Daniel stepped outside to secure the animals before the storm hit. He found Ember near the barn, waiting as he always did, patient and unassuming. Normally, Daniel would have brushed him down or checked his hooves, but the rising pressure in his chest made every small task feel insurmountable. He clipped a rope to Ember's halter and tied him loosely near the pasture gate while he hurried to gather supplies left scattered around the property. His mind raced through lists of things he didn't want to forget, each thought overlaying the next until his focus thinned to a thread. The wind grew sharper. A distant rumble warned of what was coming. Daniel moved quickly, too quickly, tossing tools under shelter, closing windows, securing loose boards. He meant to return to Ember. Meant to guide him into the barn, latch the gate, check the tie, whisper a gentle reassurance the way Lily used to. But grief steals clarity from even the strongest minds. In his rush to outrun the storm and the memories clawing at him, he forgot the simplest thing. He didn't latch the pasture gate, and he didn't move the horse. The first raindrops fell as Daniel stepped inside the house, loud enough on the tin roof to drown the world into a single steady roar. He paused near the doorway, sensing something he couldn't name, but exhaustion pressed heavily against him. He told himself he had done enough, that Ember would be fine, that he needed a moment to breathe. So he closed the door. Outside, the rain thickened, quickly turning from scattered drops to relentless sheets. Ember lifted his head at the first sharp crack of thunder. Water poured down his face, slipping over his eyes and dripping from the tangled ends of his mane. The rope tugged lightly against his halter with each gust of wind, but he didn't pull away. He stayed where Daniel had left him, muscles shivering under the cold press of rain. Minutes stretched, then hours. The storm deepened, swallowing the valley in darkness. Ember shifted his weight, but did not move from his place by the gate. He had been tied there with intention, and he believed the man who tied him would return. Horses do not measure time the way humans do. They measure presence. They measure trust. And Ember's trust was unwavering. Lightning illuminated the field again and again, revealing a figure soaked and waiting, ears pinned partly against the wind, but eyes still fixed on the house. The gate behind him thudded softly with each burst of wind, swinging half open, half closed. A fragile hinge between safety and exposure. Ember didn't step through. He waited for the signal Daniel once always gave. A quiet click of the tongue, a gentle tug on the rope, a soft "come on." Boy, but none came. Inside, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, rain pounding the house from every direction. His mind was a storm of its own, memories, regrets, the sound of Lily's laughter, the sight of her empty room. All of it circled him with relentless force. He didn't know how much time passed, didn't hear the shift in wind, didn't register the darkness settling deeper into the night. He didn't remember Ember, not until morning, and the one decision he made that night would follow him for the rest of his life. The storm did not ease as the night deepened. It only pressed harder against the valley, as if determined to test everything that still dared to stand. Rain lashed the fields in long, relentless waves, turning the soil into dark pools that swallowed each hoofprint the moment it formed. Wind tore through the trees with a raw, merciless voice, bending branches until they groaned beneath the weight of the night. Yet Ember did not move. He remained where Daniel had left him, tied loosely near the half-open gate, his body trembling beneath the cold and the driving rain. His coat, once brushed with the gentle care Lily used to give him, was now slick and heavy with water. It clung to his sides in dark, uneven patches, dripping until the ground beneath him was nothing more than mud churning beneath his hooves. Each gust of wind pushed against him, urging him toward shelter, but he would not yield. Horses survive by instinct, but Ember survives by loyalty, and that loyalty anchored him in place, no matter how fiercely the night tried to loosen his resolve. His ears flicked forward and back, straining for any sound that might signal Daniel's return. The crack of thunder did not chase him away. The flash of lightning did not shake his faith. He kept his gaze fixed on the dim shape of the house, waiting for the door to open, waiting for the familiar silhouette to step through the rain and call him in. Even as the storm grew violent enough to rattle the fence, Ember stayed rooted, believing the man he trusted would come back. Believing the promise made earlier had not been forgotten. Inside the house, Daniel's world had collapsed into a storm of its own. He sat on the floor near the window, the lights dim, shadows shifting across the room like ghosts from another life. The rain drowned every other sound, yet it could not quiet the memories rising inside him. Lily's voice pressed through the silence, soft, bright, and unbearably alive. He heard her laughter echo in the hallway where she once raced past him. He saw the faint outline of her small boots still tucked under the coat rack, untouched since the day the world took her away. He tried to slow his breathing, tried to ground himself in the present, but grief refused to loosen its grip. It fed on guilt, growing stronger with each passing minute. Daniel pressed a hand against his forehead, fingers trembling. Everything in his life seemed to circle back to the same truth. He had failed the one person who had seen only goodness in him. And now, without realizing it, he was failing the last piece of her he had left. The storm cracked overhead again, shaking the window. Daniel flinched, but he didn't move from his place on the floor. He didn't think about the time. Didn't register how long Ember had been outside. His mind was locked in a loop of images, Lily brushing Ember with patient hands. Lily giggling as Daniel lifted her into the saddle. Lily whispering secrets into the horse's ears as if he were part of her soul. The weight of memories pressed against him with a punishing force, each one a reminder of who he used to be, and who he could no longer find within himself. Hours slipped away like water under a closed door. Inside, Daniel remained trapped in the darkness of his own making. Outside, the rain carved deeper into the earth, beating rhythmically against Ember's body, as if testing the limits of his endurance. His breath grew unsteady. His muscles tightened with cold. Yet even as the storm clawed at him, he lifted his head every so often, searching the shadows for Daniel's return. He believed through trembling legs, believed through shivering breaths, believed even when belief itself began to hurt. Across the field, a porch light from the neighboring ranch flickered through the rain. The light shifted, then steadied, revealing two figures stepping outside. The neighbors, an older couple who had watched Daniel disappear into himself, stood beneath the small shelter of their roof, scanning the storm. They had seen Ember tied near the gate earlier that evening, before the rain swallowed the valley. And now, even through the storm's haze, they recognized the shape still standing there, unmoving. A quiet panic flickered between them. They knew horses, knew what storms like this could do. The woman stepped forward, eyes narrowing as she peered through the downpour. "He's still out there," she whispered. The man's jaw tightened. Daniel should have brought him in hours ago. Concern rippled through their voices, edged with frustration. But they also knew Daniel's grief had built walls too high for reason to climb. And crossing the property line uninvited felt like stepping into a wound they could not heal. Still, they watched. They stayed at the window long after retreating indoors, hoping to see Daniel emerge from the house. Hoping to see movement in the pasture. But each time they looked, Ember remained alone, head bowed, rain carving small rivers across his body. Their worry grew with the night, a quiet tension settling over the valley, one more layer of darkness pressing against Daniel's world. Ember's legs trembled beneath him, fatigue pulling at his joints. He shifted slightly, drawing a slow, labored breath. The rope tugged against his halter, creaking in the wind. He could have slipped through the open gate if he wanted. Could have sought the shelter of the barn or the thick grove of trees beyond the fence line. But he did none of that. His loyalty was stronger than instinct. Stronger than the storm. Stronger even than the cold that burrowed deep into his bones. Inside, Daniel finally rose from the floor, shoulders heavy, face drawn. He glanced at the clock, though the numbers meant nothing. The storm rattled the house once more, and he moved toward the kitchen, hoping to drown the memories in routine. But even as he moved through the darkness, a faint unease tugged at him. Something he couldn't name, something he didn't yet realize he had forgotten. The night continued to deepen, and the storm tightened its hold. Outside, Ember swayed slightly, exhaustion threatening to pull him to the ground. His breath fogged in thin wisps before the wind stripped them away. He blinked slowly, eyes fixed on the house with unwavering faith. He did not know that the night was wearing thin, did not know dawn waited just beyond the mountains with truths that could no longer remain hidden. He only knew he had been told to wait. And so he waited. But dawn would bring a sight Daniel was not prepared to face. The storm finally loosened its grip sometime before dawn, leaving the valley submerged in a heavy, breathless silence. Rain still dripped from the eaves in slow, uneven streams, and the sky carried the pale bruise of night, reluctantly giving way to morning. Daniel stood in the doorway, unsure how long he had been awake. The quiet was unsettling. For hours the storm had drowned out his thoughts, but now, in the absence of thunder, something else pressed forward, something he had been avoiding, something he could no longer push aside. His boots felt heavier than usual as he stepped onto the porch. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs, and a thin mist clung to the fields like a veil. He scanned the yard automatically, expecting the familiar shape of Ember grazing near the fence line or standing near the trough. But the fields were empty in a way that made Daniel's stomach twist. A faint tug of memory pulled at him, something about the gate. The rope, the storm coming in faster than he expected. His pulse quickened. He stepped off the porch, his stride uneven at first, then faster, then breaking into an urgent march across the soaked ground. The mud sucked at his boots, slowing him, but the dread forming in his chest pushed him forward. Each step felt like pushing through the weight of his own neglect. He didn't allow himself to think, didn't allow the truth to form fully. He just kept moving, breath tightening as he neared the pasture. And then he saw him. Ember stood exactly where Daniel had tied him the night before, his body trembling violently beneath the remnants of the storm. His coat was plastered to his skin, darkened and heavy with water. His legs wavered, barely holding him upright, and his head hung low as if the weight of the night had drained every ounce of strength he possessed. The rope, soaked and stiff, pulled against his halter with every subtle sway of his exhausted frame. Daniel stopped in his tracks. The cold morning seemed to close around him, squeezing all sound from the world. Ember didn't whinny, didn't step forward, didn't lift his head in greeting. He just stood there, waiting, loyal, believing in a promise Daniel had forgotten. A single breath escaped Daniel's throat, shaky and thin. The sight of Ember shivering beneath the fading mist felt like a hand closing around his heart. Guilt surged in a way that stole the air from his lungs. Not anger, not confusion, not even denial. Just the raw, unmistakable ache of a man confronting the truth he had been running from for years. He took a step forward, then another, each one slower than the last. Ember flicked an ear weakly at the sound, but his head didn't rise. His body seemed too tired, too cold, too faithful to abandon the place Daniel had left him. The quiet loyalty in that stillness cracked something open inside Daniel, something he had buried beneath layers of grief, thick enough to smother anything that tried to reach him. As he reached the gate, the morning light shifted, brushing across Ember's trembling form. The trembling wasn't just cold, it was exhaustion, sorrow, endurance stretched to its edge. Daniel's hands shook as he reached for the rope, his fingers stiff and clumsy as he worked at the knot. The moment he touched Ember's cheek, the horse closed his eyes, leaning ever so slightly into the warmth of Daniel's palm. That simple gesture undid him. Images surged through Daniel's mind, flooding him with memories he had tried so hard to silence. Lily brushes Ember with her tiny hands. Lily braids his mane while humming that unfinished song. Lily pressed her cheek against the horse's neck and whispered, "You're my best boy." Lily turned to Daniel with a smile that could light the darkest parts of him. Then came the memory that hit hardest, a hospital room, too bright, too quiet, her voice small but steady. "Take care of her for me, Daddy." Her, not him. Ember had been her heart, and Daniel had abandoned the last piece of her he had left. The realization crashed through him like the storm itself, shattering the numbness he had clung to for months. His breath stuttered, his vision blurred. He pressed his forehead gently against Ember's, feeling the coldness of the horse's skin, the fragility trembling beneath it. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, though the words never fully formed aloud. They lived somewhere in the air between them, heavy with regret. He slid the rope free, letting it fall to the mud with a dull thud. Ember didn't move at first. His legs shook beneath him, unsteady from the long, brutal night. Daniel placed a hand against the horse's shoulder, guiding him slowly, carefully. Ember leaned into the touch, trusting even now, even after everything. Something inside Daniel broke. Not in the way grief had broken him before, but in a way that let light through the cracks. He had failed Lily. He had failed Ember. But standing there, soaked in morning mist and regret, he felt the faint, trembling truth that he didn't have to fail anymore. He walked beside Ember, step by careful step, guiding him toward the barn with a gentleness he thought he had lost forever. Each movement felt like a promise forming in the air, fragile but real. He laid a blanket over Ember's back, rubbed warmth into his neck, whispered apologies he could no longer hold inside. He didn't know how to fix everything, but he knew how to begin, and in that moment of heartbreak, he realized something that would change everything. Morning light crept slowly across the valley, touching the barn doors with soft gold as Daniel guided Ember inside. The warmth of the enclosed space wrapped around them like a fragile mercy after the brutal night. Ember stood quietly, still trembling beneath the weight of exhaustion, his breath shallow and uneven. Daniel draped a thick blanket over the horse's back, smoothing it gently with hands that shook from more than just the cold. Each stroke felt like a confession, a plea, and a promise woven into one. He worked in silence at first, letting the quiet speak for him. Ember closed his eyes under the warmth, leaning slightly into Daniel's touch. And that small gesture brought a sting to Daniel's eyes. He brushed Ember's coat slowly, carefully untangling the clumps of mud and rain-soaked hair. The brush moved with a rhythm he remembered from long ago, Lily's rhythm, soft, patient, loving. That memory steadied him when guilt threatened to pull him under again. He whispered apologies as he worked, though most never left his lips fully. They lingered inside him, heavy yet necessary, forming a bridge between the man he had become and the man he once was. Ember listened in the way only animals can, quiet, present, without judgment. Each gentle stroke of the brush eased some part of the tension in his muscles, and Daniel could feel the horse's trust returning, not all at once, but in steady, fragile threads. Hour by hour, Ember's trembling softened. Daniel warmed water for him, held the bucket steady, and watched as Ember drank with slow, grateful gulps. The horse nudged Daniel's shoulder once, a soft, weary touch that felt like forgiveness. Daniel closed his eyes against the emotion rising in him and let the moment settle deep in his heart. By afternoon, the storm had fully passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean, the kind that seemed to breathe after long-held pain. Daniel stepped outside for a moment, letting the sun fall across his face. He looked out at the damaged fences, the scattered branches, the soaked earth, signs of the storm that matched the storm inside him. But something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, he felt the faint stirrings of direction. He walked back into the barn with renewed purpose. The place had grown tired over the months of neglect. Dust clung to the rafters, cobwebs stretched across forgotten corners, and Lily's old saddle room sat untouched behind a closed door. Daniel stood before that door, fingers trembling on the handle. He hesitated, bracing himself for the tidal wave of memories waiting on the other side. When he finally pushed it open, the familiar scent of leather and hay washed over him like a forgotten song. The light from a small window illuminated Lily's saddle, still perched on its rack. Her initials carved into the leather by a younger Daniel who had wanted to give her something she could pass down one day. The brushes she used were still in a neat row, their handles worn from her small hands. A faded photograph of Lily and Ember hung crooked on the wall. Daniel stepped inside slowly, as though entering a sacred space. His breath hitched as he ran a hand along the saddle, remembering the way Lily used to pat it proudly before every ride. He picked up one of her old brushes, turning it over in his palms, feeling the grooves where her fingers once rested. For the first time since she passed, the memory didn't feel like a knife. It felt like a hand guiding him forward. He spent the rest of the day cleaning the barn, sweeping away the months of dust and silence. The work was slow, heavy but grounding. He repaired the loose boards, reorganized the tack, scrubbed old buckets, and restored each corner with deliberate care. Ember watched him from his stall, ears flicking curiously at the renewed energy filling the space. Every so often, Daniel paused to rest a hand on the horse's neck, drawing strength from the creature who had waited for him even when he didn't deserve it. Neighbors noticed the change by evening. The older couple from across the field walked over with cautious steps, unsure of what they might find. They had seen Daniel retreat from the world piece by piece, and now they saw him moving through the barn with purpose, shoulders squared, eyes clearer than they had been in months. The woman offered warm words about Ember's condition, and Daniel nodded, with quiet gratitude. Though conversation felt difficult, he didn't shy away from it. The walls he had built were beginning to crack. Over the next few days, Daniel settled into a routine he had once known by heart. He fed Ember on time, brushed him thoroughly, checked his hooves, and laid fresh bedding each morning. Ember responded with gentle nudges, soft wickers, and a quiet patience that reminded Daniel of Lily's way of loving, without conditions. Trust rebuilt itself in layers, fragile but growing. One evening, as the sun slipped low and painted the fields with gold, Daniel stood beside Ember, with the saddle Lily cherished held in his hands. He hesitated, emotions swirling in a silent storm. The saddle was more than leather and stitching. It was a symbol of everything he had lost and everything he still had the chance to honor. With slow, reverent movements, he placed the saddle onto Ember's back. The horse stood calmly, as though understanding the significance of the moment. Daniel tightened the girth, checked the bridle, and stepped back. His breath trembled in his chest. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to ride. So long since he'd let himself remember joy without feeling punished for it. He mounted slowly, feeling the familiar stretch of leather beneath him, the steady rise and fall of Ember's breath, the subtle sway of the horse's body. For a moment, he closed his eyes, imagining Lily's laughter echoing through the yard just as it used to. He whispered her name, letting it fall into the quiet of the evening. Then he guided Ember toward the trail. It was Lily's favorite, winding through tall grasses, dipping near the stream, climbing gently toward the ridge where the world opened wide beneath the sky. Each step Ember took felt like stepping back into a part of himself Daniel thought he had lost forever. The wind brushed his face with a familiar coolness. The rhythm of Ember's gait steadied his heartbeat, syncing it with the memory of a life he had once cherished. As they reached the ridge, the sun cast long shadows across the valley, painting the land in warm amber tones. Daniel halted Ember and looked out over the fields below. The home Lily loved, the world he had neglected, the future he had almost abandoned. Ember stood strong beneath him, a quiet reminder of loyalty, surviving even the harshest storms. For the first time in a long while, Daniel breathed deeply, not out of habit, but out of hope. The weight inside him didn't disappear, but it shifted, making room for something lighter. He reached down and stroked Ember's neck, a gesture not of apology, but of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, voice barely audible. The horse lifted his head, ears flicking toward the sound, and Daniel felt something inside him settle. They stood there together, man and horse, framed by the quiet glow of evening, a moment of healing carved gently into the fabric of their story. But the greatest healing was yet to come, a moment he never expected. Morning settled softly over the ranch in the days that followed, touching every surface with a quiet warmth that had been missing for far too long. The air felt different now, lighter, gentler, no longer heavy with the silence that once clung to the house like an unwelcome shadow. Daniel stood by the fence most mornings, watching Ember graze with slow, contented movements that mirrored the calm beginning to stretch inside him. The storm had passed, both outside and within, and in its wake something new had taken root, a fragile but unmistakable peace. He hadn't expected healing to look like this. It didn't arrive all at once, or come with dramatic revelations. It arrived in small moments, steady breaths, softened shoulders, the quiet acceptance of forgiveness he had denied himself for years. He found himself speaking again, not much, but enough. Just simple words carried by a voice no longer weighed down by grief. Ember responded each time with a flick of an ear or a gentle nudge, reminders of the silent language they'd once shared effortlessly. The neighbors noticed the change first. They saw Daniel walking across the fields with a steadier stride, tending the barn with hands that no longer trembled, brushing Ember with the kind of patience that had once defined him. They didn't mention the storm or the long night the horse had endured. They didn't need to. The transformation unfolding before them said enough. Even the land seemed to respond, the grass growing brighter, the air feeling clearer, the barn standing with a restored sense of purpose. Daniel began to understand things he had been too broken to see before. He realized loyalty wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention or ask for praise. It lived in quiet moments, the way Ember had waited through the storm, the way he had never turned away even when neglected, the way he had leaned gently into Daniel's touch when the morning finally came. Animals carried a kind of love that didn't falter under weight or time. A love that stayed even when it wasn't returned, a love that healed without needing words. Those truths sank deeper each day, shaping Daniel's understanding of the responsibility he held. He had once believed grief made him unworthy of connection, but Ember had taught him otherwise. Forgiveness wasn't something earned, it was something given, freely and without reservation, by those who still saw goodness where he saw only failure. Standing beside Ember now, Daniel felt the boundaries of his pain shift. He saw his daughter not as a reminder of loss, but as the source of the bond that had ultimately saved him. He found himself visiting Lily's saddle room each evening, not out of sorrow, but out of gratitude. He dusted her picture frame gently, straightened the items she once arranged with childlike precision, and sometimes whispered to her memory, soft confessions, quiet updates, promises he meant to keep. The room no longer hurts to enter. It felt like a space held open by love, a reminder of the life she had lived and the way she continued to guide him, even now. One afternoon, as sunlight stretched across the pasture in wide golden bands, Daniel leaned against the fence with Ember standing close beside him. The horse rested his head near Daniel's shoulder, breathing in slow, steady huffs that matched the rhythm of the wind. The moment was simple, nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary, and yet it carried a depth Daniel felt all the way through his chest. It was peace, pure and unbroken. He thought of the storm then, of the long night that had shown him the cost of turning away from the world. He thought of Ember, standing alone in the rain, trusting him even in the coldest hours. That memory no longer tore him open. Instead, it humbled him. Loyalty like that was a rare gift, one he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Daniel placed a hand on Ember's neck, feeling the warmth beneath his palm. "You're home," he murmured, though the words felt more like a truth spoken for himself. He didn't run from the moment, didn't hide behind the shadows of what had been. He simply stood there, letting the quiet settle with a sense of completeness he hadn't believed possible. The ranch breathed around them, steady, alive, whole. The past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer held him captive. Lily's memory lived in every corner of the land she loved, in every breath Ember took, in every sunrise Daniel now allowed himself to see. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt worthy of carrying her love forward. Forgiveness had found him, not from others, but from within. And sometimes, the ones who wait in the rain are the ones who teach us how to come home. The sun drifted low across the valley that evening, settling into the horizon with the gentle finality of a day that had given all it could. Warm light spilled over the fields, painting the grass in bands of gold that stretched toward the distant hills Lily once loved to climb. The last hints of the storm were nowhere to be found. The sky was clear, open, almost tender in the way it embraced the land, as if offering a quiet apology for the night it had unleashed. Ember grazed near the fence line, his movements unhurried, each step easy and grounded. His coat glowed softly beneath the fading light, no longer heavy with rain, but brushed clean, warmed, cared for. Occasionally he lifted his head, ears flicking at the sounds of evening settling in. The rustle of wind through the tall grass, the distant call of a late bird, the soft creak of old wood as the barn cooled under the shifting temperature. Everything felt calm in a way the ranch hadn't felt for a long time. Daniel stood nearby, leaning against the old fence with his arms resting loosely across the top rail. The wood felt familiar beneath him, weathered but steady, much like the man who leaned upon it. He took in the quiet scene before him, allowing the stillness to seep deeper with every breath. This was Lily's favorite hour, the moment when daylight softened just enough to make the world seem touched by something gentle and fleeting. She used to call it the whispering time, saying the earth told its secrets in the colors of the sky. He could almost hear her laughter in the fading breeze. Light and unburdened, circling through the air the way it once had. The memory didn't sting the way it used to. It rested inside him with a warmth that felt earned, a reminder that grief and love could coexist without tearing him in two. He looked toward the ridge where he had ridden with Ember days earlier, the place where Lily liked to sit and watch the sky transform. That spot still held her presence, not as a ghost, but as a quiet echo of the joy she brought to the world. Ember lifted his head then, turning slightly to glance in Daniel's direction. There was no urgency in the gesture, no longing or uncertainty, just a calm acknowledgement of the man who now stood beside him, not out of obligation, but out of choice. That simple glance carried its own kind of afterglow, a silent confirmation that whatever had broken between them had begun to mend in ways deeper than words could express. Daniel nodded softly, as though returning a promise they had made without speaking. He stepped away from the fence and walked slowly to Ember's side. The horse didn't move, except to shift his weight slightly, making room for Daniel to stand beside him. Their shadows stretched across the grass, long and intertwined, merging with the falling light. Daniel reached out and rested a hand on Ember's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath beneath his palm. It was a grounding rhythm, one that reminded him he was no longer trapped in the storm of his own making. In the quiet, Daniel's thoughts drifted to the night that had changed everything. He remembered the rain, the fear, the shivering silhouette waiting for him with unwavering faith. It felt distant now, not forgotten, but transformed into a turning point rather than a wound. That night had broken him open, but it had also shown him the path back to himself. It had shown him what love looked like when everything else was stripped away. He looked again toward the horizon. The sun was sinking fast, its last colors spilling across the sky in streaks of amber and rose. The beauty of it held him in place, pulling him into a moment that felt both fragile and eternal. This was the cyclical echo of the story's beginning, the open field, the shifting light, the silhouette of a horse against the edge of the world. But everything had changed. There was no storm, no fear, no waiting at an empty gate. Daniel wasn't hiding behind walls of grief, and Ember wasn't standing in the rain, hoping for a return that might never come. They were here, together, breathing the same gentle evening air, sharing the same horizon Lily had once declared the most beautiful place on earth. The past no longer held them apart. The storm no longer defined them. What remained was simple and whole, a man who had learned to forgive himself, and a horse who had never stopped believing in him. The last sliver of sunlight slipped behind the hills, leaving a soft glow over the valley. Daniel exhaled slowly, letting the final warmth of the day settle through him. Ember lowered his head again, grazing peacefully. Content and unafraid, for the first time in a long while, the ranch felt like home. And in the quiet afterglow of twilight, Daniel understood no one was waiting anymore. They had already found their way back,